Okay, so my excuse is pretty simple. I was in the office talking to Tamara. I said, "Is this the last song?" She says, "No, there's one more." And then it was silent in here, and she goes, "I think that was the last song." Okay, so I was obeying her. Okay, so that's how that works. Why not? Yeah, she's bigger than I am, so I listen to what she says. All right, we are in what chapter? Exodus chapter 20, verse 17. All right, this is the last of our 10 commandments or 10 statements, and our 11th week, because you can't do the 10 commandments without an introduction, so that's 11, 10. All right, that's how that works. So we're coming to the end here of the 10 commandments, or as the Jews say, the 10 statements. And what we discover is that the first statement and the last statement, God brings us, kind of act like bookends. The first commandment deals with our relationship with God. The very last one deals with our relationship with our soul. And it's not hard to see that this commandment is included because coveting is at the root of all the other sins. So that's why this commandment says, you must not covet. Now, if I was a shorter speaker, the shorter as far as time goes, I would say, don't covet anymore, let's go home. Okay? But I think we'll kind of flesh that out a little more than that. And what we find is that if you break any of the other 9, undoubtedly coveting becomes the root of why you have broken some of the other commandments. At the bottom of every sin is the belief that God has somehow not given us everything we think we need. So we're going to provide it for ourselves. Now, the Hebrew word translated covet here is also one that means to desire, long for, or to feel delight in. And there is a positive aspect for being pleasant or feeling a desire for something. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 9, it says, "The Lord God made all the trees grow out of the ground, the trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food." So God says you are to desire these trees for your sustenance. At the same time, there's a negative aspect of this. Genesis 3:6, when the woman saw that the fruit on the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some of it and she ate it. So then her desire, therefore, took her to a place where she was not allowing God to govern her behavior, and so she had an ungoverned, inordinate desire that was selfish, not rooted in God. So to covet means to want something to the point that we are seeking to take it away or to own something that belongs to another person. And I like that because it tells me, if you will, that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was God's tree. I want that from God. And God says, no, that's mine. That's what Satan said. I want your position. God says, you can't have my position. That's right. So seeking to own does not mean just envying our neighbor's possessions or lusting after our neighbor's spouse. Envy and lust are not mentioned in the 10 Commandments. Now, they can lead to bad things, and they can be emotionally and spiritually detrimental and destructive, but they're not listed because they're not on the same level as coveting. It's coveting that almost always leads to envy and lust and stealing, adultery, lying, and sometimes murder. Now, this covenant doesn't stop us from saying, that's a really nice house you bought down at the lake, Daryl. Since you're here, I'll pick on you. All right? That's a nice house you bought. There you go. Doesn't stop me from saying that at all. And that's a nice new vehicle you drove up in. Okay, that's a nice older vehicle you drove up in. Okay. Doesn't stop us from appreciating nice things. It doesn't at all. In fact, it's a good thing to appreciate nicer things. It's only destructive if I end up wanting to take Daryl's truck from him when he didn't give it to me, or squat in his house when I don't own it. But there's a constructive side. How is that? That's a nice house. How did you get that house? And he will tell you the story of his life from the time he was 12 and he had to work for a living deep in the coal mines of West Virginia, and he'll go on from there. I'm making that up, obviously. Okay? Well, what did he do? He worked hard and over the years saved so that he could purchase a house. You want a house like that? There's no secret to it. You too can have a house like that. Go to work, stay with a job more than 6 months. Just saying. Work hard. You too can have a house. You too can have your own vehicle. You too can have a vehicle that does more than get you from here to there. I mean, when the VW first came out, you could get a 64 VW. It was a nice car. Got you from here to there. But there are better modes of transportation. Earn it. Okay. So it's when we want something and we seek to control that or gain possession of that, of a specific house or a specific spouse that belongs to somebody else, that's where coveting becomes evil. When we look at the second tablet of the Ten Commandments, we'll see that commandments 6, 7, 8, and 9 are the ones that forbid us from committing certain evils: murder, adultery, stealing, and lying. Then there's this last one. And this is the one that prohibits things that leads to murder, adultery, stealing, and lying, and that's coveting anything that belongs to our neighbor. His property, his people, possessions. And here's another interesting thing, is that this is the only one of the Ten Commandments that governs our thoughts. Every other one is a behavior. So why is this included with the other 9? Because as I've said, it's often coveting that leads to the breaking of the other commandments. Thieves steal because they desire what someone else has. It's the reason for murders. People kill so that somebody can't come back after them and steal what they've stolen. Even thieves know when they're wrong, right? Okay. Adulterers want to possess another person's spouse. We lie, we bear false witness to cover up other crimes committed because we've coveted something. One day Jesus was in a crowd and a man shouted out at him, "Teacher, please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." And Jesus knew where the man was going, so he continued in Luke chapter 12. He said, "Beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own." And so Jesus is contradicting the values of a coveting culture. When did a coveting culture start? In the Garden of Eden. Okay? That's what got us here. I want something God told me I can't have because what is God doing? He's not providing me with everything I want. So I'm not trusting God. I'll get back to that. So if you have a covetous character, no matter what you have, it's never enough. Your stuff will never satisfy. Your relationships are never good enough. You'll always want something you don't have. When John D. Rockefeller was asked how much money is enough, he started Standard Oil. He was the richest man in the world at one time. How much money is enough? He said, "Oh, just a little bit more." Okay. You've seen it happen here. Some of you came off the streets, or you're couch surfing, and you're like, "Man, I finally got a bed, and there's air conditioning, and there's heat." And you're here a couple of months, and now you're quabbling over, "That's my favorite blanket." You went from, "I'm so grateful to have a place to live," to, "Now I'm going to start coveting the stuff that I don't own." See how quick it happens? Yeah. I've been teaching here for a long time. I picked up a few things. So one pastor writes, "We in America have had more materially and have had more wealth than all the rest of the world, and yet it has not made us more contented. It's made us more covetous." Our possessions in this country form a symbol of how we've attained something. If you go to other countries, there may be a prince or a baron or a lord, and they've got titles. We don't have titles here. We have possessions, so we flaunt them. Okay. So, let's get back to the idea that covetousness is not a state of your wallet. It's a state of your soul. As long as our hearts covet something, desire for something that's not ours, we will want what the other person has, no matter how much we have or how little they have. So again, it's one thing to appreciate the good things that others have. It's another thing to want that thing. Okay. So where does coveting come from? Let's look at a few things. Number one, coveting comes from poor vision. Not physical vision, spiritual vision. What we want usually starts with what we see. And when we covet, it usually means we don't see enough. What do I mean? When we covet something, we see what we want, but we don't always see the full price that will be paid. Okay? We see the doctor's house and go, wow, you got a nice house. But you don't see them eating toast and oatmeal for the first 5 years till they pay off their medical bills. You just want the end result. We don't see the price that was paid or the price that we will pay. So if I start coveting my neighbor's spouse, is that spouse that I'm covering of such value that I'm going to trade my family, my respect, my responsibility, my church, and my ministry, and my credentials for them? Now, I will freely confess in public that I am a man very naturally and joyfully attracted to women. But there's no woman on earth worth the price of what I've done to attain where I'm at in life. Love you. Ain't happening. Someone was, well, you've never had this. I said, sorry, dear, I've had better. Yeah. You know what the better was? God's choice for me. Yeah. Now, that's my opinion. The world's opinion is they're willing to pay the price. It's worth it to you? Yeah. It cost me $40,000 a month to pay off my spouse, but it's worth it to me. They make $4 million a month. Make your choices, folks. But covetousness is not only not seeing what's out there ahead, what it could cost us. Remember, the best math you can learn is the future cost of current decisions. Write that down. The best math you can learn is the future cost of current decisions. So we don't always see things up close. We don't always see things far away. We like the house, but we don't know what it costs them to get that house. Some young man looks at a restored car and says, boy, I sure wish I had a car like that. And the owner said, well, my car didn't come from wishing. It took me 3 years to restore it. Right? Lots of stories where somebody would come up to a musician who is just an expert in his field, say, boy, I give my life to play like that. And the musician said, I did. I was in Arkansas, and I played piano for the youth group there, and sometimes I'd pound out something and have some fun. And one of the 20-year-olds came up to me and says, wow, Jim, I sure wish I could play piano like that. I said, you can in 20 years. And he said, I'll be 40 then. And I said, you're going to be 40 anyway. You might as well be playing the piano when you get there. Today we see something and we want it, but we don't always take into account how long the road will be to acquire it. And most of the things we covet, at least those things worth having, are available to us if we're willing to pay the price and the hard work to get there. We've gotten into a little bit too much of an instant society on some of those things that we need to have, so we go out and we get a credit card. Now, years ago, before everybody had credit cards, when did the first credit cards come out? Do you remember? I mean, I think it was in the 60s or something like that. My parents didn't have credit cards. You didn't have cash, you didn't buy it. You know? And now we can just max out anything we want. And then we can get to the point where we just declare bankruptcy and start over. And I've actually known people who borrowed more and more and more stuff and paid for more and more stuff on their cards knowing that they were going to go bankrupt to keep the stuff. Covetous. There are few things in our lives that we should want bad enough to pay the price for it. Okay. A covetous spirit comes from poor vision, and second, it comes from looking for shortcuts. So as I said, we can get it now. Okay. I can put an app on my phone, call it, deliver it, put it in, it takes it out of my account, and the pizza shows up at the door. Wow. Now, when I was younger, many of us in this room will remember this. You wanted to know something, you had to go to the encyclopedia, look it up. If you didn't have an encyclopedia at your house, you had to wait till the library was open. Okay. Now I've got Google. That's right. Where is this at? When did this happen? Whose birthday is this? What's that song? Siri, tell me that song. When I was writing a paper and I didn't know how to spell a word, I've got 3 dictionaries at my house I haven't opened in a long time. Yeah. Now we've got spell check. Now it tells you that you spelled it wrong. You know what? I've become a poorer speller since I had to stop thinking about how to spell. I really have. I have. Here's an ancient word, concordance. Concordance is a device that if you wanted to know where it was in the Bible, you had to remember what the word was. And the best one was the King James. A lot of us grew up on King James, so it's in my mind. Now, Strong's Concordance was actually put together before computers, and Dr. Strong has every single word outlined in this concordance, and he did it by hand, including and, the, in, is. So we'd be racking our brains. Where's that verse where it talks about beauty for ashes? What's the word? And then if I didn't have it in the King James, I didn't have another concordance. Then you would look it up, and then it would tell you everyone. Oh yeah, there's the one in Proverbs, and then you could go. Now I have Google. When I'm writing my sermons, it's open. Or if it's not on my computer, I ask my phone or ask my iPad. Boom, 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 boom. That's where we're at. We don't always want to pay the price to get somewhere. We want to win the lottery. Now there's a lottery. The funny thing is that people who make a substantial income, they don't play the lottery. And people who are poor, they pay the lottery. And then they lose their millions because they don't know how to be good with their money. If God wanted you to have that money, he'd have given it to you. But you know what? He doesn't throw good money after people who haven't learned to budget. When you get out of here, see Daryl. See me. That's right. They get to. Good save. We want a Dr. Phil episode to help us with all our problems. We want drugs from our doctor to help us not be anxious when our problem is bitterness and anger. See, we're now drugging people because of their bad attitudes, because it's quick. We don't want to go on a diet and exercise. We want a pill to take weight away. Instant access. It's the nature of a covetous spirit to be short-sighted. We want instant answers and instant gratification. The other thing about a covetous spirit is it tends to blind us. We're so focused on what everyone else around us has, we prevented ourselves from seeing what we do have and recognizing the value. There's a story of Russell Conwell. He was a pastor of a struggling Temple Baptist University in Philadelphia. It was also later the founder of Temple University and then later on Temple Hospital. He tells about a time in 1870 he was traveling looking at biblical lands, and he ended up in Iraq visiting these lands, and a guide told them about this very wealthy Persian man that heard that there was a field full of diamonds, and he went to bed that night. He was very upset because he didn't own the diamond field. Like the wealthiest guy around. Had to have the diamond field. So he sold his land and traveled looking for this diamond field. Never found it. After his death, they discovered that his land was the diamond field. And there was a diamond mine today known as Kolganda, and it yielded a 185-carat diamond called the Sea of Light. And because he was looking elsewhere, he didn't see what he had. And that's a covetous spirit. It always sees diamond fields somewhere else. It's in our neighbor's house. It's in our neighbor's spouse. It's in that motorcycle. It's in that position. It's in that community. It's in that fame. Oh, if I just had that job. If I just moved over here, I could start over. You can't start over because you're always taking yourself with you. Okay? And if you're a horse's hind end in Independence, you're going to be a horse's hind end in Kansas City. Have I said something wrong? Okay? So with all the coveting and envying of this good life and what we think somebody else has, we grow dull, we go blind to the gifts and the people that are around us. How do you know you're coveting? It's not hard to diagnose. If you find yourself saying or thinking these things, if I only had, you may have a problem with coveting. If you think you only had a better job, a better family, a better phone, a better church, a better car, a husband or a better one, a wife or a better one, more kids, less kids, a better team to root for, then I'll be happy. And none of it's true. If you're not satisfied with what you have now, you won't be satisfied when you get what you think you really need. And if you can't thank God for the little that you have now, you won't thank Him later for the more and the different that you think you have to have. If you can be grateful for what you have now, you'll be grateful for when you have more. And if you're grateful for what you have now and it goes away, you're still a grateful person. Gratitude is something you practice whether you have something or not. I wrote that in my book after Barbara died, that the Lord instructed me to stay grateful to Him before I knew she passed away. That was His instructions as I was sitting in the car. Well, Barbara and I practiced gratitude. Every morning, we would sit together in the living room and we would talk and we would pray. What are you grateful for? This is what I'm thankful for today. Okay. So if I go up and play this keyboard, I can play a left-hand boogie-woogie thing that I've been doing since I was 12. Don't even look at my hand. Muscle memory. When Barbara died, I was gratitude because it was spiritual muscle memory. I wasn't putting it on for the first time. It was something I've been practicing for 20 years. So if you're grateful for the little that you have now in this program, so many people, I'm so grateful to get here. I can't wait till I leave. Got 4 months. And start my life over. Your life starts over with your attitude, not your residence. You have a question, of course.
How do you grieve? I mean, I'm not asking personally, but I like for myself, grieving and being thankful. It's hard to feel the emotion of grief and gratitude simultaneously.
They're not exclusive. My greatest times of grieving, crying, I should have invested in Kleenex. Their stock would have gone through the roof. I'm sure of it. My grief was over not having her. My joy was that I had her. God was sovereign in our marriage, and He didn't change when I became a widower. He was still sovereign. I don't have an easier answer for you. That's our attitude, be our attitude in all of our life. Okay. Where does this come from? When I was 19 years old, living in Newbury Park, California, with my friends John and Cece, there was another girl that would often come into the house and came in and out. Her name was Janet. And Janet's a couple of years older than I am. She was singing on some record stuff that was going on. Anyway, way years ago. So her best friend died. I thought it was her sister, and she said, well, she was like a sister, and her best friend died. And Janet just tore into God. How could you? You know how we do? It's God's fault. You know, you took her away. You did this. She just vented. God's so cool because he waits for us to quit venting before we can hear. So whatever you need to tell God, just vent it. He's big. He can handle it. Okay. Janet vents, and the Lord speaks to her heart. He says, Janet, the whole time you've been talking to me, you've been mad that she's no longer here, and not once have you thanked me for the time you had with her. Okay. I was 19 when I heard that. 40 years later, sitting in my RAV at St. John's in Tulsa, God says, I need you to continue thanking me for what you had. And I said, yes, Lord. And somebody said, how could you do that? I said, because I'm a disciple. What does that mean? It means there's only one plan A. There's no plan B. Obedience is plan A for the disciple. Now, you don't have to be a disciple. You can be saved and go to heaven. A disciple doesn't allow you choices. My choice was to obey God. And he said, be joyful to me for what you had. What am I still joyful for? I'm joyful for the things that I had with Barbara, but also joyful for the things I've never experienced. I've never fought cancer. I've never lost a limb in a war. I've never been in a horrible traffic accident. Both eyes work with the help of glasses. Praise God for God's technology. My hearing started to go, so I wear hearing aids. It's the better to hear you or ignore you, depending on what you say. At least now I know what I'm ignoring. Before, I didn't know what I was ignoring, right? I'm grateful for my life. I'm grateful that after I did a budget, after Barbara passed away, I had to sit down and do a budget. Can I maintain this house on my income? I waited 2 weeks, and then I faced the music. And I went, I can. I'm grateful for that. I have 2 jobs. I couldn't do it with one or the other. But God set me up with 2 jobs, my church and Woods. I'm grateful for that. When you have gratitude in all areas of your life, I'm not seeking something else to make me happy. So I've got a little disposable income, and when you do, you can please yourself sometimes. I think I'd like that CD. I like that jazz singer, and so I bought a CD. Cool. There were times when I couldn't. When Barbara and I were first married, we made $90 a month after basic bills. We didn't have cable TV, and when I was afraid to turn on the air conditioner in the window. Remember those days? Huh? Yeah, now I can. I'm grateful for that. What's not to be grateful for? But your wife died. Everybody dies. I'm not unique. I'm not the first man to lose a wife. Well, I lost a child. So did Adam and Eve. So did God, called him son. There's nothing in my life that I can say, pity me for. So gratitude keeps me from wanting things that God has not supplied. God supplied Barbara. We were going to the same church. And I'm 3 years now, more than 3 years now, single. Wear the ring. Why? I'm single, but I'm not available. My heart hasn't left Barbara yet. Okay. Until he supplies the right woman, I'm not looking. You know. Besides that, all my favorite women are already taken. So what am I supposed to do with that? All right. All right. I don't covet, but I enjoy their friendship. Okay. Well, you need a woman. I don't need another woman. Okay. God has seen that it's not good for a man to be alone. Right? Okay, so he's talking about Adam because Adam didn't have another person. Now, God created Adam to have certain needs met. When people say, I don't need anything but God, I've said, well, you're not scriptural. Okay. Adam needed the woman to satisfy God's plan to populate the earth. Okay, so, okay, I'll share something with you. What page am I on? Oh, I'm halfway there. Okay. So I'm reading Genesis. Maybe Daryl can help me out with it. Maybe some of your theologians can help me out with this one. I'm reading Genesis, and God creates Eve, takes a portion of his side, not just a rib, but it's more than that. There's flesh involved. Okay, and he closes it up, and Adam looks and he goes, huh. Now, previous, God has said it's not good for man to be alone. See, this was the first crisis in Scripture. It wasn't sin, it was aloneness. Okay. He says, it's not good for man to be alone. I make a helper that is suitable for him. I won't go into all the background of that. Needless to say, she was exactly what he needed. But before he gets there, God says, I need you to name the animals. Isn't that cool? See, God knew he had a need. Adam didn't know he had the need yet. So he says, we're gonna ease you into this. I'm gonna bring some animals by. You give it a name. Oh, okay. Oh, I see that. Mr. and Mrs. Aardvark. That works. Okay. Mr. and Mrs. Baboon. Okay. Mr. and Mrs. Chinchilla. They're sweet. Okay. And he goes on. He gets done and he goes, where's my missus? God's like, cool. Go to sleep. I'm going to do something spectacular. Wakes up. Boom. Now, I think, without a doubt, when we get to heaven, Eve's going to be the most astounding specimen of physical beauty you've ever seen because God created her. And this is what Adam says. He goes, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Here's my question. Daryl, you ready? How did Adam know he had bones? You need to answer me next week. I'll give you a week. So I've been messing with this for like 3 days, okay? And I actually sent a text to my friend Rabbi Dale Cohen, right? And I told him this. Now this guy's rabbi. He grew up speaking Hebrew. He reads Hebrew, okay? I said, how did Adam know that he had bones? And he wrote me back and he said, good question. I said, I was expecting a good answer. He still hasn't got back to me on it. I'm assuming he's studying. Okay. What else did Adam have? He had motor skills. He didn't toddle, he walked. He could speak. He could understand communication. He could distinguish between this fruit that was good to eat and this fruit that was bad. All the things on the first day, God created innate in him. This has been messing me up for like 3 days. I love it. The other thing you'll find if you read Genesis and you read it again with this in mind, God starts with the simplest of creations, and each successive creation becomes a little bit more complicated. Let there be light. Now, that's easy. Ball of gas. Okay. Let there be waters and earth. I'm going to separate those. Simple enough. And we got beasts and livestock and creepy crawly insects and whatnot. Then on the sixth day, he creates Adam out of the dust, out of something that's already there. Boom. Breathes into him. Adam inhales the Spirit of God and becomes a living being. Then God says, got one more. He creates the woman, the most sophisticated and complex of all of God's creation. That's right. So when I was in biology in college, and we studied all the different systems, right? Circulatory system and the respiratory system and the nervous system, and then we did the reproduction system. Here's the man's. 12 minutes later, we're done. Here's the woman's. For the next week. We're discovering the fascination of what God does in order to create another human being. What an honor. And I thought, I'm not smart enough to be a doctor. I just know I'm not. But if I was involved in any sort of medical field, I'd have to be involved in the idea of seeing a sperm and an egg become a baby. Just absolutely fascinated me. And so now I'm grateful for what God has created in me, in others. Thank you, Lord. What other surprises do you have for us? I walked out of woods the other day, and there was a gorgeous sunset. And I'm like, oh, this is so pretty. And then I thought, one day I'm going to see it from the other side. Number 4, a covetous spirit can distort our values. Jesus said, seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he'll give you everything you need. See, the Christian faith doesn't mean we give up our possessions. Godliness is not more likely found in the poor than in the rich. God never condemns the rich, and he never places the poor on a pedestal. Our faith teaches us that God created a world and it's full of gifts for our pleasure and our benefit, but it also warns us to keep them in their place, and that's in second place. When we covet, we think another object or person or position is going to bring us happiness, and you know what? It's too much of a burden on any one person to bring you soul happiness. It wasn't up to Barbara to fulfill all my needs as a human being. My first relationship was with God, and I told her often, I said, you know, dear, I love you. But more than I love you, I fear God. And so I'm going to treat you according to my fear and my respect and my admiration and my awe-struck self in the presence of God. That's how I was taught to treat my wife. This is God's daughter. She was God's daughter before he trusted me with her. I do not want to be messing with God's daughter. Dads, think about your own daughter. You are willing to do jail time for your own daughter. I was not going to disrespect God's daughter. And it was also not up to her to make sure all my personal needs were met. That's too much for any one human being. Okay? God fills our deepest needs, but he's also created us so that he's not sufficient for all those needs. Right? He created needs for procreation. You can't reproduce with God. He gave us men and women. God gave us needs, and then he fulfilled those needs. He created us so that we were going to burn energy within our stomach, and they were going to eliminate it. So he provides the food. He created us to breathe air. He provides the oxygen. He created the fish not to do that. He created them with gills, not with lungs. He creates your needs, but then he also fulfills those needs. If there's something in your need in your life you absolutely have to have and you don't have it now, maybe you don't need it now. Maybe you want it now. Right? But you don't absolutely have to have it now. God needs to remain front and center. When our values become distorted, our vision of God dims. And it's very difficult to envy somebody when your heart trusts God. I'll say that again. It's very difficult to envy somebody or their house or their position or their relationship when your heart trusts God. That's why it's so very easy for me and how much I enjoy when I see a couple that have a great relationship. And I can say, I'm so happy for you. I don't envy them. All right? I don't covet it. I'm happy for you. My life is not diminished because you're in a great position. When our faith is right and we're seeing God rightly, we have a confidence that what's best for us will happen at the right time. When I'm not focused on God, I get focused on my desires, or as this 10th commandment says, my neighbor's possessions. And if I'm not content with who I am in God and what God has provided for me, then I'm going to want what my neighbor has. Because, well, they seem to be happy, and so if they're happy with it, I should be happy with it. Yeah, but what we often don't see is how discontent our neighbor is. If I just had the money, if I just had the fame, then why have so many rock and roll artists committed suicide at 27? Can you name anybody that committed suicide at 27? Yes, you can. Start with Jimi Hendrix. Janis Joplin, Amy Winehouse, Kurt Cobain. I had millions of dollars and fame and miserable. And you go to church with some people that have never made it out of the 6th grade, and they're the most joyful people, and you envy their joy. And you get more than they are, and you're envying them. Too often we see our neighbor as our competitor and not our companion. Paul said love is not envious. It's not jealous. It doesn't covet what it doesn't have. Paul says, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. But when we're in competition with other people, when you have it bad, I feel better. And when you've won the lottery, I can't rejoice with you. I wanted to win the lottery. How many weeks has it been since I told the story about the wishbone Barbara and I had? It's been a couple of weeks. Some of you don't know, we saved the wishbone off a turkey, sat on a windowsill for a while, and then you got to make a wish, right? And we split that thing right up the center. And it scared both of us. We kind of looked at one another. And what it taught us was that I don't win if my wife loses. And we have never wished against one another again. And the only time we were ever in competition is when we played Scrabble. That's it. We wanted to rejoice with one another. I didn't want to win over her. See, when we rejoice in our neighbor's blessings, we become rich ourselves. We abound in joy. We abound in grace. But if I'm going to covet something, I'm becoming small. I'm becoming petty. I always feel better about myself when I'm happy for you. And I always feel the Spirit checking my spirit if I'm glad that you failed, because then I'm in competition. That's why I like my relationships with numerous pastors. I had coffee this morning. I need to say coffee and tea because Brian Norvell doesn't drink coffee, drinks tea. And when they're successful, the kingdom's successful. And they're rooting for me. When I'm not desiring the things around me, I'm content. The richest people are not the people that have the most. They're the people who are content with what they have. And if we think if we have that other thing, it'll make us content, the thing doesn't make you content. It's the Spirit of God within you that does that. So it took me a while, and I'm talking years and years of being a Christian, before I came to accept the way God made me. Okay. For instance, I've always played sports, and I've always played music. Okay. Now, basketball wasn't going to do me any good, so I was never attracted to that. Okay. Never going to slam dunk a basketball. I moved on. I played soccer. The ball was on the ground. I was closer to the ground. I was a good soccer player. Okay. I played tennis. I played a lot of tennis. I could play baseball. But I was never the best player out there. Made the All-Stars. I was on a traveling team. They took the best players from the American Youth Soccer Organization, and I was on that. But I was never the best player on the field. Started taking piano lessons when I was 8. And I practiced. And I practiced, and I practiced, and I practiced hard, and I practiced more, and I practiced hard. Only later to realize I'm not a natural musician. I've met natural musicians. And I'm like, I'm never going to play piano again if you're going to do that at 14. So, when you accept what you're gifted in, you stop being something you're not. I was never going to be picked number one. I was never going to be the highest scorer. Rush, yes, Genesis, and Kansas, none of them were going to ask me to play keyboard. And I really wanted to. I wanted to be a progressive rock and roll keyboardist. Wasn't happening. Okay. Rush didn't need a fourth player anyway. Okay. And Rick Wakeman, he went to a conservatory. How am I supposed to beat him, right? So what happened is that once I accepted my limitations, I became more content with who God created me to be. So one of my favorite philosophers of the 20th century was a man named Harry Callahan. Does anybody remember Harry Callahan? You don't? Who was he? Dirty Harry Callahan. That's right. That's right. Dirty Harry Callahan had this philosophy. Man's got to know his limitations. I quote that in my first book, actually. When you learn your limitations, you're really happy with life. I'm not trying to be something I'm not. Okay? I kind of like to sing at one time, but I haven't got a voice anymore. Actually, I had a voice till I hit puberty, and then I couldn't carry a tune. But it had other benefits, so that was good too. Now I enjoy people that can sing, so I can play piano behind them. Okay? Got some new screens coming up at the church, some big LED screens on both sides, one on the back. I don't know how to hook them up. I don't know how to do the computer. I'm limited. Duel's coming over tomorrow. I'm not mad at on computers. I'm grateful I know somebody that does. See? I don't have to have that possession. The other cool thing is when you realize all the things you don't have, you realize how many other people you can bless by them using their gifts. Yeah. Somebody said, why don't you click your own PowerPoint when you're doing your sermon? And that way, you're always on it. If I do that, I take away somebody else's joy of involvement in the service. Well, they don't do it as good as you are. Yeah, but we're better because he's doing it. Paul warned Timothy that the love of money was the root of all kinds of evil, but he put a positive spin on it. In 1 Timothy 6, he said, true godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. After all, we brought nothing with us when we came into the world, and we can't take anything with us when we leave it. And contentment is utterly incompatible with covetousness. And I said this before, and I'll say it again. Nothing that we have do we ever truly own. The mortgage says that my house is mine, but it was built in 1915. How many families do you think have lived there, right, in the last 108 years? You know what? One day I will kick off the mortal coil and somebody else will own the house. This ring will be on a granddaughter's finger. These shoes will be too small for anybody I know to wear, unless you're in the 8th grade. Okay? We're just stewards. I'm a steward of God's possessions. I'm a steward of God's money, which is really cool because when my truck broke down, I needed to put $1,000 in it. And I said, Lord, I'm taking 1,000 of your dollars out of your account and I'm investing it in your truck. You know why? Because it's always easy to spend somebody else's money. I'm a steward of it. I want to end about a story. I want to tell you a story about a Christian named John Tauler, Tauler. This goes back to the 14th century. And the story goes that one day John met a beggar. And he said, God give you a good day, friend. And the beggar replied, I thank God I never had a bad day. John was taken back a little bit, and then he says, well, God give you a happy life, my friend. And the beggar answered, I thank God I'm never unhappy. Never unhappy? What do you mean? Well, the baker said, when it is fine, I thank God. When it rains, I thank God. When I have plenty, I thank God. When I'm hungry, I thank God. And since God's will is my will, and whatever pleases him pleases me, why should I say I'm unhappy when I'm not? Now, Tyler's a little confused, but he's kind of in awe of his friend, and he says, who are you? And the beggar says, I'm a king. Well, now John's about ready to believe him. He says, really? Where is your kingdom? He looks up, points at his rags over his heart, and he says, in my heart. My kingdom is in my heart. And this is where the Ten Commandments leads us. And it's a large kingdom indeed. And it invites us in to possess and be possessed by the unpossessable. And the only way you can do is thank God it's there. When you have that perspective, all the other 9 commandments fall perfectly in place. Father, thank you for this day that you have made. Thank you for teaching us all the grace of gratitude as God is in our life. Help us to put things in possession, especially those things that will not last. Heaven and earth will disappear. I don't own anything here. But I do know that you and your word and your love will last forever. Help me to focus on those things that are true and lasting. Help me to rejoice when with my neighbors who are not my competitors but my companions. Help me to rejoice when others are doing well. Help me to see that you have always been sovereign in my past and you will always be sovereign in my future. Therefore, today is a day of joy, as will tomorrow be. That others look at us and say, how do you do that? And we can say, yeah, let me introduce you to the one who is my example. So we thank you for this day, Lord. Thank you for the rain we had. Thank you for the internet. Thank you for Google. And with all the technology, Lord, we thank you for the physics you created that allows it to happen. But more than anything else, we thank you for you. Amen.